What's up everybody, I'm Jason and welcome back to some more tips and tricks for the EOS R5. This is part 2 of a 3-part series looking at manual focusing on the EOS R5 and its siblings. Last time I looked at the basics of getting into manual focus mode and the full-time manual focusing capabilities and limitations of the camera platform. In this video I'm going to look at the focusing aids that are available when in manual focus mode, and in the next part and last part I will look at the settings and options that control and affect manual focusing, especially with focus-by-wire lenses. As with most of these videos, much if not all of what I'm going to cover also applies to the R5 siblings, including the EOS R, RP, R6, and R3. However, I own and use an R5, and so that's what I've used for all of my testing as the primary focus of these videos. As such, if you use one of those other cameras, then there may be differences between your camera and what I describe here. We'll start off with RF lens distance scale functionality. On most manual focus lenses, the distance scale provided the users with everything from accurate focusing distances to depth of field estimations to the ability to zone focus. With the move to autofocus lenses, many of the needed features have been dropped for one reason or another from the lens's distance scale. And with that, distance scale's power utility has withered. Due mostly to internal changes, namely the move from rotating to linear focusing mechanisms, Canon's RF lenses have eliminated the window-based distance scale of the past completely. Instead, it's been replaced with a digital version that's superimposed on the camera's screens over your shooting image. Settings for the RF lens distance scale are found on the Shoot 7 menu under the Shooting Info Display menu entry and the Focus Distance Display submenu. There you'll find two configuration options that you can adjust. First, Display Settings controls when the distance scale is displayed. The distance scale can be set to be displayed when the camera is set to manual focus mode only, when the camera is actively focusing, always, or never. Of those settings, when focusing gets a bit complicated. First, the distance scale will be displayed when the camera is focusing, whether that's because your hand is turning the focus ring in manual focus mode or the autofocus system is doing the focusing in autofocus mode. It doesn't matter. Second, if the shutter release is configured to start metering only, so you're a back button focus user, the distance scale will not be displayed except after one shot AF has completed and the ability to touch up focus is enabled, or the lens is in manual focus, obviously. Finally, the distance scale will be displayed until the metering timer expires and then it will be hidden. The second option, Unit, controls whether the scale is displayed in feet or meters. Now, unfortunately, the UI designers that designed the distance scale for the EOS R platform must have never used or spent any time studying manual focus lenses or their distance scale. As a result, the virtual distance scale has many of the same attributes and limitations that hamper the scales on most autofocus lenses. So to start with, there are no marks for the currently set aperture's depth of field. This makes it impossible to zone focus or estimate the current depth of field as you would on many manual focus lenses in the past. Secondly, the distance scale has a short throw, or for lack of a better way to describe it, similar to the scales on autofocus lenses. There's no way to zoom in or scroll with the scale to get more precision around the current distance. The minimum focus distance is on the left side of the display, infinity is on the right side of the display, and the whole scale is as long as what fits in between. Thirdly, the scale is directly mapped to the lens's focusing position. Consequently, most of the distance scale is dedicated to close focusing distances. As a result, there can be very little precision available at normal working distances for most lenses. Notice how there's very little scale between the 3-foot mark and the infinity mark with this 24 to 70 mm f2.8 lens. Even though it's 70 mm and f2.8, the hyperfocal distance is at 198 feet, and there's plenty of focusing to be done in the tiny range between the 3-foot and infinity foot marks. Finally, on zoom lenses with variable minimum focusing distances, the distance scale doesn't resize with zoom position. Instead, as the minimum focusing distance moves, the scale simply shrinks the active area, indicated by the white horizontal line, to match the new focusing range. Additionally, for lenses with focus limiters like the RF 100-500 or 70-200 f2.8, the distance scale will indicate the limited focus range, but will not prevent you from manually focusing into it. Suffice to say, I'm not a fan of the distance scale as it stands on the R5. Moreover, I find this situation frustrating as it's purely a software consideration at this point, and it would be incredibly easy to make the scale far more powerful and useful without actually expending a tremendous amount of work. Consequently, I keep the distance scale disabled so it doesn't clutter up the display when I'm shooting. With the distance scale out of the way, let's move on to focusing aids that use or alter image data in the viewfinder. The first of these being the ability to magnify the sensor's output. On the R5, pressing the magnifier button will step through 3 zoom modes: full image, 6x magnification, and 15x magnification. For the R, RP, R6, and R3, the magnifications are 5x and 10x instead. Now, if you're in autofocus mode, pressing the magnify button will zoom in on what's under the AF point for spot, single, and expanded AF methods. For zone and large zone AF methods, the magnifier will zoom into the center of the zone's frame, and in face plus tracking AF method, magnification is not available. Additionally, though not specific to manual focusing, if the camera is set to spot or 1-point AF, the camera can still autofocus while in the magnified view. Now, if the camera is set to manual focus and the focus guide feature is enabled, then pressing the magnifier button will act the same as it does in autofocus mode, zooming in where the focus guide is positioned. If you don't have the focus guide enabled or haven't used the autofocus or moved the autofocus box, then the magnifier will zoom in at the center of the image, or if you have moved the magnifier previously or your autofocus or focus guide was off-center last time you used it, at the location where that last was, even though it won't be displayed on the screen. In any of these cases, you can move the magnified view either using the multi-controller or by dragging your finger around on the screen. Now, do note, Canon uses natural scrolling on their cameras, so dragging your finger from right to left across the screen moves the image to the left and the magnified area towards the right. The next manual focusing tool I want to look at is focus peaking. Focus peaking is configured on the MF peaking settings menu on the AF2 menu page, and you'll find 3 options in that menu. The first entry, peaking, enables or disables manual focus peaking. Easy. For quicker access, you can also set one of the camera's customizable buttons to enable and disable peaking. I've also covered button configuration in a previous video, which I will provide a link to in the description below. The second entry, level, controls the sensitivity of the edge detection algorithm. In principle, this will directly affect the depth of field the peaking highlights cover, as well as the intensity of the peaking highlights themselves. When set to high, the edge detection sensitivity is increased, which makes the peaking effect more intense, but also makes it less precise. Low, conversely, provides a more subtle or subdued peaking effect, but also more accurately reflects the center of the focus position. The final entry, color, controls the color of the peaking effect. You can choose from red, yellow, and blue. As for choosing a color, my recommendation is to play with it. The best color will depend on several factors, including the colors in the scene you're shooting, your own sensitivity to color, and perhaps, surprisingly, the current picture style. Now, the first 2 of those shouldn't be that surprising. A contrasting color to your scene will likely be easier to see because it will stand out better. Likewise, your eyes may be more or less sensitive to certain colors, especially blue, and consequently that may affect which focus color you want to use. However, the big surprise to me, though it shouldn't have been, was the focus peaking system's response to the camera's picture style setting. What tipped me off to this was actually a note in the manual that said manual focus peaking may be hard to discern when Canon log is set, and recommended turning view assist on. Now, Canon log flattens the image and reduces contrast without the compensating LUT being applied. That's what view assist does, which also is what my normal picture style does to a lesser extent. And sure enough, changing the picture style on my camera to either standard or upping the contrast and saturation of my own picture style immediately improved the rendering of all focus peaking colors. It was even sufficient to allow me to set the level to low and still be able to clearly see the peaking information. Now, in retrospect, this probably shouldn't have been that surprising. Peaking is applied in the viewfinder's image processing pipeline after the camera has applied the picture style to the image as a whole. As a result, picture styles that don't provide a lot of contrast, including contrast created by sharpening, will not have sufficient contrast for the peaking's edge detection algorithm to really sink its teeth into. Of course, this also creates a bit of a situation with respect to using peaking and flat or low contrast picture styles. The latter, of course, is useful for shooting video, at least in some situations, and when you don't need to go all the way to full-on Canon log. Additionally, lower contrast picture styles have long been recommended for RAW shooters to better approximate the raw clipping points with the preview image's histogram. Finally, with peaking enabled, there are a few things to be aware of. First is that peaking isn't displayed in the magnified view. Second, peaking information is not shown on any display connected via HDMI. You can use peaking with an external monitor or recorder, at least in video mode, if you set HDMI display on the Shoot 8 menu page to Camera Plus Monitor. However, that setting's only available for video, and the peaking information will only be displayed on the camera screen, not the external monitor. As for recommendations, well, there's not a lot here that isn't situational and personal. Now, I don't personally use peaking a lot, and when I do, I almost always have found that I have to tweak the color or intensity some to meet my needs for any given situation. The last focusing aid available on the R5 is the Focus Guide. The Focus Guide, for lack of a better description, is an autofocus indicator for manual focusing. At its core, it provides feedback based on the autofocus system's measurement of focus. Enabling the Focus Guide is done through the Focus Guide entry on the AF2 menu page. Alternatively, you can also set one of the customizable buttons to toggle the Focus Guide on and off as well. Now, the Focus Guide is only displayed when the camera is in manual focus mode and an electronically coupled EF or RF lens is attached. The guide appears as either 2 or 3 arrows near a normal-looking focus box. Normally, the arrows are located above the box, but when the box is close to the top edge of the screen, where there wouldn't be room for the indicator arrows, they are mirrored to be below the box. Because the Focus Guide uses autofocus phase information, it indicates not only the focus state, but which way the lens must be focused to get it in focus. It does this by splitting one of the 2 arrows horizontally. The distance between the split arrows indicates how out of focus the subject is. The further apart they are, the more out of focus the area is. Focus direction is indicated by the side that isn't split. So if a single arrow is close to the guide box, then the guide is telling you that you need to focus towards the camera to achieve focus. Conversely, if the single arrow is the further away of the 2 from the guide box, then the Focus Guide is telling you that you need to focus towards infinity to achieve focus. When the area under the guide box is in focus, the top and bottom arrows will align and the box and arrows will turn green. Now, if the camera cannot determine the focus state of the area under the box, the Focus Guide will turn gray and the arrows will change into bars that are reminiscent of the focus towards infinity indication, but aren't. Additionally, you can control the size of the Focus Guide's box by changing the current AF method. If the AF method is set to Spot AF, then the Focus Guide will be the same size as the small Spot AF box. If the AF method is set to Single Point, either of the expanded methods or any of the zone methods, then the Focus Guide will be the same size as the larger Single Point AF box. Finally, if the AF method is set to face plus tracking, one of 2 things will happen. If the camera cannot detect a subject, such as a person or animal, or the autofocus subject detection is set to off or none, then the Focus Guide will be the same size as a single point AF box. However, if one of the subject detection modes are enabled and the camera does detect a subject in the frame, then the Focus Guide will use a box that surrounds the detected subject, much as it would in autofocus mode. One final frustrating limitation of the focus guide is that it's only available in manual focus mode. The biggest consequence of this is that if you're manually focusing the lens using the full-time manual focus capabilities, the focus guide will not be displayed when focusing the lens. This is especially noticeable if you're a back button focusing user when you have full-time manual focus capabilities for all lenses all the time, but focusing the lens never actually triggers the manual focus state. So those are the focusing aids available on the R5. Next time I'm going to be looking at the settings that control and affect manual focusing, especially for focus-by-wire lenses. If you found this useful, let me know by hitting the like button. Also, if this kind of thing seems like it might be your kind of thing, please consider subscribing if you're not already. Remember, you can't forget to unsubscribe later if you don't subscribe now. Finally, if you know someone who might find this useful, help them and me by sharing this with them. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.